This is the, now, twice in 1 year, or 1 school year, the Wu annual lecture. And we were able to put this on because Professor Wu, who was here in our econ department, and then went on to a little tower down in Stanford called the Hoover, then went even further to a tower called the Washington Monument and the White House in the Reagan years, was one of the great faculty members. And so his family, particularly his wonderful daughter, Suzanne, has come to us and offered to help us sponsor these lectures. And we have tapped the world. We went to Berkeley, which thinks itself the world, and we got one of their geniuses to tell us that the dollar might not always be the world's greatest and wonderful and only global instrument, that it could be replaced. We then also went to President Obama's White House because there was a woman there who wanted to tell us about how things were going in the White House. She actually survived as the head of the Council on Economic Advisors, where she had to wrestle with people like Professor Larry Summers of Harvard fame. And if you've ever wrestled with Harry Summers and won, you are going to get a Nobel Prize someday. And so it is that we have tried to keep the spotlight on people who are in the spotlight, who can tell us something from on high to help let us know where the world turns. I was many years ago in a very comfortable living room down in Cardiff by the sea. Lots of people don't know where Cardiff is, and that makes people in Cardiff very happy. It's a wonderful community north of San Diego, and this home belonged to Chal and Sheila Johnson. Chal was a towering figure at Berkeley when I first knew him, and then at San Diego when I knew him, and then in his own right when he published his Japan policy research papers. They were wonderful. So I was sitting there one day and I said, oh, you know, I don't know some of the people on your board. Where did you find them? They must have been in very powerful positions, which means not in academic circles. And he said, well, I searched here and searched there, and you know how I am, which means you know what a high standard I set. And I came upon somebody who I thought was terrific, and I got him to go into our board. And I said, well, who is that? And he told me, he said, oh, he's a guy who actually went to Stanford. And then after Stanford, he went to Harvard. And then at Harvard, he decided to get a couple of degrees, a law degree and an MBA. And then he went off to Japan. And there he made a great name for himself. He was a Fulbright scholar in Japan. He wrote a prize-winning book while in Japan. And there seemed to be no American company that didn't want him to serve somewhere and someday on their board or even direct their business. Of course, that's the man who's going to speak to you tonight, Glen Fukushima. He's married to a wonderful woman who I hoped would be here tonight, but she's busy in Tokyo. This is called a busy, busy couple. But he took time out because, of course, running Airbus Japan is not an easy business. I'll tell you that Airbus, now I just came in from Morocco and landed in Kennedy, and the people in the place that searches you to make sure you're not importing terrorism, you know, the people who look at your passport 8 different ways, they said, you are the luckiest guy in Kennedy today because you got here 2 minutes before the big new Airbus that flies in every day from Paris. And it carries so many passengers that it fills the entire lounge and up the steps, and then we have to close the door, and those other people have to wait another hour in order to get down the steps to get through the lounge area. The Airbus, the giant that now flies to San Francisco. be aware that you stay away the day that it's going to fly in. So Glen can tell you all about that and everything, but it's a view that we wanted from Tokyo. And believe me, you're going to get it. Please join me in welcoming Glen Fukushima.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick, for that very generous and elaborate introduction. It's great to be here in San Francisco, and I really am privileged to be invited to share some thoughts with you at the Spring 2012 YLU Lecture Series. There are many friends, old and new, who are in the audience, but I want to just recognize a couple of them. If I recognize everyone, it would take an hour or so, but I just want to recognize Consul General Inomata, who is the Japanese Consul General here in San Francisco, ably representing Japan, and also Sheila Johnson, who is the wife of Chalmers Johnson, the professor that Patrick talked about, and who certainly was a great inspiration and encouragement to me and others who were in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s engaged in the study of Japan and East Asia. So I want to thank both of them very much for coming, as well as other friends who are here today. Let me first tell you that in the next hour or so, I'd like to talk about trends in U.S.-East Asian relations, and especially recent developments in U.S.-East Asian relations, especially as seen from Tokyo. And then a bit about the TPP. And can I have a show of hands here as to how many people here have heard about and feel that they know about the TPP? Can you raise your hands? Okay, well, actually, that's more than what I experienced in many other places, so this is a more well-informed group. And then a bit about what I view as Japan's insularity in recent years, and then some conclusions. So let me start with an introduction, which is to first thank you for the invitation and say that it's especially a pleasure to be here because San Francisco is my favorite American city. And I have three sets of ties to San Francisco. The first is that as an Army brat, and my father being assigned at the Presidio of San Francisco back in the late 50s, for about a year and a half to 2 years, I was in elementary school in San Francisco. In true Army form, he had 3 residences during his 2 years here, so I went to 3 different schools. But one of the schools was the Hawthorne School in the Mission District, which has since been renamed the Cesar Chavez School. And then I went to the Sutro School in the Richmond District when I was living on Pershing Drive in the Presidio of San Francisco. So I have very pleasant memories from those 2 years as an elementary school student here in San Francisco. The second set of ties is that I was an undergraduate at Stanford from 68 to 72. And it was not only that I studied as an undergraduate there, but I also met my wife there. She and I participated in the 22nd annual Japan-America Student Conference, the Nichibei Gakusei Kaigi, which some of you may know is a conference that began in 1934 and a conference between American and Japanese college students. And so we met there in 1970 at Stanford. And then in 1972, we got married. And then when I was in graduate school at Harvard, she taught Japanese at Harvard for 6 years. And then went to the education school at Harvard, got her master's, and then gave up on education and went to Stanford Business School. So she has many friends in the Stanford, Palo Alto, and the San Francisco area. And then the third set of ties is that from 2000 to 2004, I worked for a Silicon Valley software company named Cadence Design Systems. At the time, it was the world leader in EDA, electronic design automation, which is software to design semiconductors. And so this company hired me to head the Japan operations. So I was based in Japan, but I was coming to the San Jose headquarters about once a month. So I spent a lot of time in the Bay Area, and that's when I was asked to join the board of the Japan Society of Northern California. So I still serve on that board. So with these 3 sets of ties, it's always good to be back to San Francisco. In fact, I like San Francisco so much that last year I bought a condominium on Market Street. So I plan to spend more time here in the future. So today I'm going to talk about U.S.-East Asian relations as seen from Tokyo. And this was one of about 5 or 6 titles I offered to Patrick as candidates, as topics I could talk about. He, in consultation with others, felt that this might be the most interesting for this audience. This particular title is one that I took from a history course I took at Harvard, 1975-76, taught by John Fairbank, Edwin Reischauer, Jim Thompson, and Peter Stanley, a course that was begun by Ernest May and Akira Idie several years before that, History 1711, which was U.S.-East Asian, the history of U.S.-East Asian relations. Now, I need to start with 3 caveats. The first is the title says, as seen from Tokyo. And I'm sure many people will say, well, Tokyo is a diverse place. It's got 35 million people in the greater metropolitan area. How can you presume to talk on behalf of Tokyo? Well, I would say that for those in the policymaking community in Japan, in Tokyo, as well as in the business community, and in the mass media and the academic community, I think there actually is a set of issues that they're dealing with when it comes to U.S.-East Asian relations. So I think I can hopefully adequately share with you some of the issues, some of the concerns that many in the policymaking community have in Tokyo about U.S.-East Asian relations. Secondly, I'm certainly not, I can't say that I'd be qualified to represent a Japanese view because I'm not Japanese, I'm a U.S. citizen. But having worked in Japan now for 22 years, I have been engaged in probably at least 25 or so study groups, Benkyokai, Kenkyukai, which are meetings, some that are once a month, some that are once every 2 or 3 months, where people from various professions and backgrounds will get together and discuss issues. And this is really kind of a very interesting aspect of being in Tokyo, is that the longer you're there, the more of these groups you get to join. And in almost all cases, I would say 90% of the cases, these groups, these study groups I'm in are all Japanese. So I'm the only non-Japanese. There are some, for instance, where the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs is the regular guest, and all the others are Japanese. And so I think I do have an opportunity to hear the concerns of the dialogue within Japan by those who are engaged with U.S.-East Asian relations. So thirdly, I have to admit that although this is an academic setting, I'm not going to speak based on rigorous academic research, but rather based on my experience. And my experience is basically the 8 years in graduate school at Harvard, the 2 years as a Fulbright Fellow at Tokyo University, 5 years at USTR, and then 22 years working in Japan. And just very quickly, because my background is complicated, I'm a U.S. citizen of Japanese ancestry working in Japan for a European company. And my professional background has been in academia, journalism for 1 year after college at the Asahi News, law practice, government for 5 years, business for 22 years, and also in the nonprofit sector where I've served on a number of boards, both in the United States and Japan. In terms of companies, I've worked for 4 American multinationals, and now Airbus, which is a European multinational. And so my work and travels take me primarily to the United States, Asia, and Europe. I travel outside of Japan at least 15 times, sometimes 25 times a year. Now I travel outside of Japan once or twice a month on average. I used to, on certain occasions, travel 3 or 4 times a month out of Japan. So I always try to learn from what's happening outside of Japan. But after having spent 22 years in Japan, I'm now ready to move back to the United States, and later this year I do plan to move back to the United States. Just one word about Airbus, just to give you some sense of where I'm coming from, because for the last 7 years I've been working for this European company. It's by far the most global company I've ever worked for because there are 54,000 employees, but 84 nationalities represented in this company. The CEO is German, the number 2 is French, the number 3 person is American. The leadership team is primarily Germans, French, Americans, Spaniards, and Brits, but it is 84 nationalities, so it is a truly global company. And along with Boeing, which are the only two companies that manufacture commercial aircraft with more than 100 seats, I think both of us are doing very well. Last year, Airbus had 64% market share and had more than 1,620 orders for aircraft, which is the most in history. But Airbus has almost 5,000 aircraft on backlog, that is orders that have not yet been delivered. Boeing has about 4,000, I think. So we only deliver about 500 or 600 aircraft a year, so which means that even if orders stop tomorrow, we still have almost 10 years worth of business to do. And despite the fact that airline companies may have a lot of ups and downs, aircraft manufacturers, because of the tremendous demand for aircraft around the world, especially in Asia and in the Middle East, our two companies are actually doing quite well. So, U.S.-East Asian relations. Now, clearly, U.S.-East Asian relations are of vital importance for Japan. Historically, from the 19th century, when the United States first really got engaged with East Asia, and then in the 20th century, especially as it relates to the U.S. relationship with China and the U.S. relationship with Japan, and the World War II, all of that, I think the period from the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905, up through the World War II, is a period which was transformational for Japan. And so the U.S.-East Asian relationship has been a center of attention in Japan. And now in the 21st century, we're seeing some interesting changes and iterations of this U.S.-Japan or U.S.-East Asian relationship. So there are four developments in the U.S.-East Asian relationship that I'd like to focus on for the next few minutes. First is the rise of the Asian economies. The second is the perceived decline of the U.S. in Japan. The third is the 2009 regime change in Japan. And the fourth is the U.S. so-called pivot or rebalance to Asia. So I'll talk about each of these for a few minutes. Now, the rise of the Asian economies. In December of 1992, right after the election of Bill Clinton to be President of the United States, I was invited to the Little Rock Economic Summit. And I was asked to give a talk about the East Asian economies since World War II in 12 minutes. And I had, I think, 6 slides that Tom Khalil, who was at Berkeley for a number of years and then later joined the National Economic Council, helped me to put the slides together for. But the main point I made in this presentation was that in 1960, the East Asian economies only accounted for 4% of the world's GDP, but by 1990, the East Asian economies accounted for 25% of the world's GDP, and that it was growing, and that for the United States in its future, we really need to understand and exploit the opportunities in Asia, but also recognize the challenges in Asia. So that was my main point, and I think actually my prediction then has been borne out. In the 50s through the 1990s, I think as far as East Asia was concerned, on the economic side, the U.S. attention, especially from the 60s, was on Japan. And Ezra Vogel at Harvard in 1979 came out with a book entitled Japan as Number One, Lessons for America. From the 1970s, I think the Asian tigers or dragons, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, attracted a lot of attention. Chao Johnson, in addition to devoting a lot of energy to Japan and to China, focused quite a bit of research on these countries and the East Asian economic model. And obviously in the 1990s, China and India have emerged, and more recently, a lot of attention is being devoted to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Indonesia, now recently Burma. In Japan, I think that these developments have resulted in what might be called an Asia shift with regard to the attention given, at least on the economic side, to Asia as a production base and also Asia as a market. In many ways, I think companies, governments, journalism, many of those organizations which it appeared to me in the 1980s, certainly when I was at USTR, devoted the best and the brightest to working on the United States because the U.S. was so important for Japan, not only economically but politically and in terms of security. There are many of the best and brightest now obviously working on the United States, but many, I think, are now being shifted to work on Asia, and especially China, because of the perception in Japan that, at least economically, Japan's future is in Asia. Obviously, however, there are risks for Japan in Asia. One is economic risk, as exemplified by the Asian financial crisis of 97-98. Political risks, including things like the history question with regard to China and South Korea in particular, and military security issues with regard especially to North Korea and China. But if one looks, and these are slides, the next few slides, the ones that are not with blue background, are slides that have been kindly been shared with me by friends in the Japanese government. So I guess I can't vouch for their accuracy, but I assume they're accurate. This, for instance, shows the supply chain in East Asia. And you can see up here that in terms of intermediate goods, the dark arrows show the most intensity. Well, the dark arrows are primarily here in East Asia. It's the light arrows that Japan has with NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, that is Canada, US, and Mexico, and the EU. So I think this is one indication of, in the supply chain, how increasingly important ASEAN and China are for Japan. If you look at the change in Japanese trade, even just in the few years between 1995 and 2011, you see that China went from 5% to 20%. And US has gone from 27% to 12%. EU has gone from 16% to 10%. So I think the growth in China and the decline in